I'm starting a little early today. I have a really special guest for you guys. As far as podcasts go, Locked On 49ers is the official podcast of the San Francisco 49ers, and Brian Peacock is the voice of that podcast. Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell everybody what you are, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, Aaron, thank you, man. I appreciate you asking me to join you on the podcast here on the YouTube channel. Love the video stuff. I'm going to be doing more video stuff myself with Locked On 49ers. But yeah, I'm the host of Locked On 49ers. We're coming at you daily on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering the 49ers 5 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week in the offseason. But that's our thing with the Locked On Podcast Network, is we do it daily, and also host an NFL podcast with Matt Williamson. You might remember him from ESPN. He's a former college NFL scout, and we're doing the NFL thing daily as well here on the network, the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. So one show on the Niners, one show on the NFL as a whole, and every day. So I'm doing 10 podcasts a week, and I'm all about it. I'm all in on the podcast game. So you can find me in a lot of different places, and soon to be more on YouTube as well. So I like your mood background you got going, by the way. I got to get something going on back here behind me if I'm going to start jumping in on the YouTube game.
I copied another group of YouTube guys who had the mood lights, and I'm like, I hope they don't get mad, but that looks dope. Eventually this bedroom won't be where I do this from. It'll be from once my brother moves out of my house, I'm going to set up an office into kind of like a studio. I still have a normal job, but I plan on making the production value of things go up eventually. Sound stuff on the wall, maybe a green screen, things like that. Just up in the production value so things look and sound better.
Yeah, you can go so far with it too. You can go as crazy as you want, and everything I do is like, if you saw this side of it, like I'm dialed in audio wise, and that's always
you have the best voice for freaking podcasting, bro.
Thank you.
For sure.
And I've always been an audio guy anyway. I played music for forever, and that's what made it so easy for me to transition into, doing radio. And I studied broadcasting, and I originally wanted to do, audio recording and music recording, but I really gravitated towards sports and radio stuff because it was really fun and really loose. And so I had the audio knowledge and the sports knowledge and brought that together, earlier on in the podcast game. And was able to put it all together. So it's really fun. I mean, it's so fun talking sports for a living. And it's a blessing to be able to do that. So much fun. So, and big announcements coming, by the way, for anybody who doesn't listen to Locked On 49ers, check it out. It's on all your podcast apps. But Monday got a big announcement coming that's going to ramp this thing up with Locked On 49ers too. So I'll put that out there.
Nice. Did you go to school for communications, things like that nature?
Yeah. I went to San Francisco State, the School of Broadcasting there, the Becca program. And like I said, originally I was thinking of doing, music recording, and I've done a lot of music recording in my life, but really gravitated toward the radio thing and did the KSFS radio there, and did a couple different radio shows on campus, one about sports and one about, and one just music show. And then went on to work at KBR. I started interning in radio, and then I got a job at KBR behind the glass doing producing and board op and stuff like that, and got my start doing that. And then I moved on to doing some on-air traffic reporting in radio in the Bay Area, and then eventually left that, doing podcasting full-time now.
I think me and you are around the same age. I'm 41. I didn't know what I wanted to do back in the day. If I would have been a little bit more in tune with myself with as far as communications, podcasting, radio, television. I'm a little late to the game as far as like YouTube is probably gonna be as far as I ever go on it. But man, if I could do it all over again, and I was like a little bit more in tune with my brain and not such a kind of a malcontent growing up, I probably would be in the same line of work. You know what I mean? Because I love it. I freaking love radio.
It's playing around in a lot of ways, it's playing with audio, and I always loved gear, and I always loved music equipment back here. I've pared down a lot of it. I got a lot more stuff over here, but I've always loved gear. I've always loved audio, and it's so fun. And when it's almost like playing when you're working was always the goal. And it took me a while to figure even that out and realize, oh geez, I could do this at school and do this for a living. Like there's a program for this, and it wasn't easy to get into that program. And San Francisco State's it's not Stanford or anything, but just that one program is really full. So had to work hard to get into that. Once I figured out that this was something that I could do, and actually start taking school seriously. And school got a lot more fun. Originally, I was going to do business management or something like that. And I was sitting in accounting classes like, what the hell am I doing? This is dumb. This is not fun. I don't want to do this. So I really did find something that suits me that I really enjoy doing.
Definitely. I definitely think it's for you. The question I've asked everybody who I've had on, and when I ask you too, is off-season grade. If you had to grade the 49ers on either a 1 to 10 scale or an A to F, what would your grade be based on all the moves, draft, everything?
We're talking draft, free agency, trades, and everything. It's hard not to grade the 49ers high because they still have one of the best teams in the NFL. Now, are they a better team than they were to start last year? I think they might be a little better than they were to start last year, but I don't think they're as good as 2019. And that's one of the things that I see a lot is people remember the 49ers in 2019, best defense in the NFL, then were injured last year and are like, oh, they're going to be healthy this year because they can't go through that again. And they're going to be like they were in 2019 and be the best defense in the NFL. But DeForest Buckner's not walking through that door. Robert Saleh's not walking through that door either. Nick Bosa's original ACL is not walking through that door. And that's a huge key to that 49ers defense is Nick Bosa too. And Richard Sherman is gone. So it could look a lot different on defense with a new defensive coordinator. And who knows, it could turn out being better. But I think right now it's wise not to expect what we saw in 2019 with this 2021 team. And it's really it's a strange year for the 49ers to be in transition, but still be a team that is vying legitimately for a Super Bowl and should be trying to win their division. And so that's what's fascinating about this 2021 49ers team is they've got a quarterback controversy and a little bit of a competition there. They've got a number 3 overall pick at quarterback that they're bringing in, but they have a guy that just took them to a Super Bowl for 15 months ago or whatever it was, and who's a pretty good player and a high-profile player himself. So it's going to be not just a local story, but a national story as far as quarterbacks go, and they are a pretty good team, and they expect to be really good. Now, I would pause to and I would say, slow your roll a little bit to some 49ers fans that just think they're going to roll in and win 13 games. It's a really tough division. There's some really good teams in the NFC, but they do have a schedule that I think is winnable. And I think Vegas has them at 10.5 wins. I would take the over at around 11-6. I think that'd be a really nice season for the 49ers, put them in position to be in the playoffs. But obviously the big question that's going to really hang over the team all year long is quarterback. When is Trey Lance ready? When do you plug him in? How good does Jimmy Garoppolo play? Does everybody stay healthy? So there's so many storylines with this 49ers team, and it's fascinating. And in a lot of ways, it's a team in transition that's going to start to look, and already will, I think, look a lot different than that team we remember in 2019.
I was listening to Grant Cohn because, it's a duty as a 49ers fan. You got to listen to him. And he had some overview of what he saw in the one day, I think, of 11-on-11s or 7-on-7s with Trey Lance. He said there was there's some little bit of struggle, but it's expected. To me, and I'll ask this to you, what is a realistic expectation? To me, I would think that whatever struggling he does go through is expected. 1, he's jumping 2 levels. 2, he hasn't played in a long time, and it's the NFL, and so to me, when I hear anything along the lines of struggle or this or that, I always, to me, at least right now, I give it like, oh yeah, it's expected. How do you feel about that sort of news, and what's your take on it?
To be honest, as far as how he's playing as a quarterback and throwing the ball around, I'm not super worried about that because we've seen him do that at the college level. We know how big and fast and strong he is and how strong his arm is. I think the big takeaway from anything, at least for the first few months of his, off-season career here until we start seeing him on the field in preseason games, I think it's a little much to be looking at, okay, he was, 7 of 11 passing and he threw an interception in practice. I mean, that stuff I'm not even worried about at all. I am looking at his overall attitude, his mindset coming into this. Does it seem like he's that it might be a little bit too big for him? Those would be the things I'd be worried about. And from those reports, there's none of that at all. And I think that's obviously what the 49ers loved about him was the neck up. And so as long as it's not too big for him and he's coming in and he's competing, I think that's all you can ask for. And that's an A+ offseason for Trey Lance. And anything more than that is a bonus. If he actually wins a starting job out of training camp, I mean, that would blow me away, just because what you mentioned, how little he's played, and it was at the FCS level. There's a huge jump here. He shouldn't be ready to play right now. It would be insane if he was ready to play. And at some point during his rookie year, I think he's ready to take snaps for the 49ers. Will Kyle Shanahan plug him into the middle of a playoff race is a big question. Will he be ready if Garoppolo was to get hurt early in the season, or would they go to Sudfeld or Rosen in that case? But just the mindset that Trey Lance comes in with, and you hear someone like, I think it was George Kittle that said he doesn't seem like a rookie out there. It doesn't seem like a guy who just turned 21 years old. That's a fantastic sign, and I think that is the best sign you could be looking for Trey Lance in this offseason leading up to his first preseason. And then once he gets on the field in games, we can actually start grading what production he has, and if he's bouncing passes, or in his case, there's been some reports of him sailing some passes over receivers' heads, and that's one thing that even John Lynch mentioned on the PFF podcast with Chris Collinsworth and he realized it, and the 49ers know that too. It's one of the things he needs to work on is just his overall accuracy. He's one of the least accurate quarterbacks amongst those 5 first-round quarterbacks in this draft. So that's something he's going to have to change, whether it's just mechanics or footwork or whatever it is. So there's still some work to do for him, and he's got to play more football. So that's why I think he should see the field. It would be better for his development to play rather than to sit potentially for 1 or even 2 years. And by the way, I didn't answer your question fully, the question before, and give an actual grade on the 49ers offseason. I kind of talked around it, but
it's okay.
If I had to give a grade, I want to answer your question fully and give you a grade. I think I'd give the 49ers something like a 7.5 out of 10. I'm a little bit worried about what they gave up to go up in the draft long term, because you have to factor that in to their moves this offseason, because they did give away those picks. And then corner is something that I'm a little bit worried about. It if there's one position group I'm looking at, after wide receiver 1 and 2 is a big question mark, but they've got a lot of bodies. Maybe something can come out of that group of players, but corner is one thing I'm worried about, and they don't seem super worried about it and didn't address it until pick 102 in the draft. So I can't give them a 10 out of 10 on their offseason, but it was a solid offseason, and they're looking primed to be a really good team in 2021.
Speaking of wide receiver, you mentioned it. To me, I feel they have. I've heard there's a twofold thing with me. One, I heard that there was a Jawan Jennings sighting, and he looks in better shape. He's moving a lot better. And they said last year he came in and his body was not in proper shape as far as NFL shape, and that he's changed his body. And then 2, they have a wide receiver issue past number 2. They have a conundrum, and there's talk about Jalen Hurd. They don't really have an answer right now. That worries me a little bit, just because if one of the top 2 guys go down, who do you got? I have no idea. So if you had to pick out of the guys we have right now, who would you say is the best shot to maybe take that slot/third wide receiver job?
That's a really tough question, and you're right. I mean, we just saw it with Jeff Wilson too. You come out of the draft like, you got too many running backs. You got extras here, and look at the depth chart here, look at the depth chart there, and you realize, oh yeah, all of these guys could get hurt. We saw it last year. So you're one play away from having, whoever it is, Mohamed Sanu or Richie James, or maybe Jalen Hurd shows up this offseason and doesn't get hurt and makes his presence felt. Jawan Jennings. If I had to guess right now, it would be Richie James, who's the number 3 guy. I think he was one of the big winners in this offseason as far as the 49ers draft, and not taking a wide receiver, not bringing in anybody big. That could change, obviously. There's a big name out there in the trade market that could change that. But Richie James has always impressed me when he got on the field. I think he has potential to be a better wide receiver for the Niners than he has been a return man. I think he's a nice fit for the slot. If Debo and Ayuk are your main guys on the outside, we've seen him make big plays when he got a chance and got a lot of targets. There was that COVID game where Brandon Ayuk last minute wasn't able to play. They just gave Brandon Ayuk's game plan to Richie James, and he blew up for 180 yards. So he can make plays, he can run routes, he can get open. He's not afraid to run routes within the trees in the middle of the field. So I really like Richie James. And if I had to bet right now, I would say he's the number 3. Mohamed Sanu is sort of fighting, I think, with Jawan Jennings and Jalen Hurd, and all 3 of them could be that big slot player, whereas James would be the smaller slot type of wide receiver. I don't know what to expect. I'm sure the team is hoping that Jalen Hurd is that guy, but I don't think you can count on him. You can't expect anything at this point from Jalen Hurd in his career with an ACL that he's coming off of. and the fracture in his back he had before that. I mean, that's tough to overcome. And then if he was to even get on the field, does he get hurt again? Is that just who he is? Because he's been getting hurt dating back to high school. Like, that's just the way it's gone for him. I think it's the reason why he moved off of running back in the first place. And Juwan Jennings, it's interesting here because he doesn't separate. I think it hurt Juwan Jennings to not have a preseason last year because he needs contact. And I wouldn't expect him to look amazing in shorts because he's a sluggish guy and he's not going to be this huge separator jitterbug that looks amazing until you put the pads on. But he's a really physical player and he can win at the catch point and he goes through people more so than around them. So I expect him to look much better when the pads come on, and it's a really good sign to see him maybe thinned out a little bit. Maybe that will help his separating and help his route running and show a little bit more quicks, because he didn't have a lot of quicks coming out. I think he ran a 4.7 coming into the draft in 2020, and obviously didn't make an impression because he was on the practice squad all year for the 49ers and didn't make an appearance even though they had all those injuries. So Juwan Jennings is an X factor, and I have no idea what to expect because I haven't seen him since that big sluggish receiver that I thought maybe could get moved to tight end coming out of college. River Craycraft, it was injuries. Like, he's just a guy to me, you know, not to badmouth him or anything, but I don't see him making an impact even if he did make the roster. And I would hope that there's 5 or 6 better wide receivers than Craycraft to make the roster. One guy I think that nobody talks about that has a really good shot to make the roster is Trent Sherfield, just because he's a really good special teams player and a gunner. And I think that is what you need from your 5th and 6th wide receivers that make the roster, because they're not going to be on the field a lot. They've got to play special teams. So I think that reason, Richie James and Trent Sherfield, I would feel the most confident about making the roster for the 49ers following the 1 and 2 in Ayuk and Debo.
What was I going to say? With the, it's funny, they did all this talk about injuries and, you know, maybe changing draft philosophy too, and how they have people on their boards. And then sure enough, where you get a couple days through, you know, where the team's all together, team minicamp, and then we have the Jeff Wilson Jr. injury. Do you just see that as a freak thing, or is this kind of like a bad omen for us this year? I'm kind of teetering on it. I just think maybe it's just a odd thing that happened, or is this just a sign of things to come again?
It's a little bit of both. The 49ers, I don't know what's going on. It's something that's hard to identify, and they've already changed their training staff, right?
Yep.
Remember when they changed their training staff a few years ago, because this is dating back to the previous regime in San Francisco. They've been one of the more injured teams in the league over the course of the last, I think it was like 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, even more so. So I wouldn't expect there was a lot of bad luck last year. I would never expect that to happen again. But I think when it comes to running backs, there's a level of attrition. That's why I say you don't pay running backs, because there's so many that can produce for you, and the replacement level is pretty high, and you're almost guaranteed to get hurt, right? At that position. That's just the way it is. Now, he wasn't even hurt running the football and getting banged around with people either. So that's the other problem. And longevity is not great when it comes to running backs. So if it was a different position, I'd be like, okay, what's going on here? Because you're just hanging out at the facility and you're popping your meniscus or whatever it was. But I think it just goes with the territory for all the mileage running backs have on them. And I think that's why you need depth more so than star power at the running back position. So through that lens, I think it was really smart by the 49ers to draft 2 running backs and take value with the 6th round pick with Elijah Mitchell if they thought he was a really good player, even though they'd already just drafted a running back. And now we've already seen that. And now it looks like everybody can fit in pretty neatly. But even then, there's probably going to be one more running back injury at least before the end of camp. So, even Jermichael Hasty, who still is probably the odd man out that maybe you would think would go onto the practice squad, maybe will have an opportunity to make the team too if somebody else gets hurt. So that's just that's the nature of that position. But if the 49ers go through another season and have more injuries than other teams in the NFL, they've got to take a hard look and figure something out. And maybe it's the way they've drafted, maybe it's the way they've trained in the past. It's just, that's one of those questions that's really, really hard to answer from someone who's on the outside.
I asked Eric Crocker when I had him on, because he said he pretty much never got hurt until the last year he played football. Because the whole Jalen Hurd getting hurt on the side field last year was just the craziest thing ever. Like, nobody touched him. He blows his knee out. He says that there's differing factors. One of them, he says, can be how people train, whether they don't train certain muscles around certain groups like knees and ankles good enough, or the type of exercise that they do. He said that could always be a determining factor. But to me, it just seems like you're chasing your tail with this. There's no like right or wrong answer of why some people just I don't know, maybe it's genetics that some people just can't stay healthy.
There's a
Does
lot of
he?
that too. Like I think there's a lot of weeding out that used to happen in football because there was more contact for so long. It's
Oh
sort of like
yeah.
the Nolan Ryan principle in baseball. Nolan Ryan threw more than anybody ever, and then he was able to throw more than anybody ever when he was on the field, go deeper in the games, played forever in his career. But most people would break down if they can't handle that first. So they would have broken down before they got to the point where they're in a 49ers training camp because they wouldn't have lasted through high school, wouldn't have lasted through college. So I think what we're seeing in some cases is players that can't really handle physically, their body's not going to be able to hold up and handle that, but they don't put that much stress on their body as players used to, so they skate through a little bit further. So that I think that maybe is part of why we see so many players get hurt. And I think you're right, players are just bigger and stronger than ever, and the way they work out, maybe they're too strong with their big muscles and not strong enough with the muscles that are around that. And I think, there's so many other factors ramping up too quickly. When you didn't work out playing football, you're only lifting weights in the offseason. Then you go actually play ball, and it's a different set of muscles, and it's all different. And you see that a lot with rookie players because they're trying out for the draft, and they're essentially become track athletes for 3 months. And they go back in and try to play football, and their body's not trained right for those kind of movements again. So I think there's a number of things that go into it. But it's pretty fascinating, and it's definitely not my strong suit. I would definitely lean towards someone like Crocker, who actually trains athletes, than my expertise when it comes to injuries and how to prevent those things for NFL players.
So I have. I'm going to try to. I want to, because I know you have a limited time, so I'm going to kind of like almost fast track some of my questions here, but in an organized fashion. To go back to the Trey Lance topic. How would you handle him? Like, would you? I talked to John Chapman yesterday. He doesn't think you should run the Taysom Hill type thing with him and not make him a gimmick player. He's like, if you're going to use him, bring him in the first series of the third quarter. Like actually having him run the show at quarterback and not is some gadget. Let's run a jet sweep with him type thing. What would you do if you were the guy in charge? Would you use him in more of a, like a Taysom Hill way, or would you actually let him, take the team down the field and play a couple series?
It's really hard because I understand both sides of that. On one hand, he's one of your 53 players. If he's got a uniform on Sundays, utilize your best players. If he can give you an advantage somehow over the other team, then utilize that. I don't, but like John probably said, and like a lot of people said, I don't love the idea of him not playing quarterback either. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think it's a really good look, and we've seen it in the past. There's that famous photo of Jay Cutler, where he's standing there and he's just like, the play happens and he doesn't even move off the line of scrimmage, and he's completely disinterested, and he's motioned out as a wide receiver, and I don't remember who was at quarterback at that point and what they were doing on offense, but that just always sticks in my mind. And you don't want to do that to Jimmy Garoppolo either. You bring in this rookie, then you motion Jimmy G out to wide receiver, and then the quarterback either throws or runs a quarterback draw or something like that. I don't know. It's kind of hokey, but I think Kyle Shanahan has this player, and he's such a great offensive mind. I'm sure he could dial up some things with Trey Lance, even if he's not the pure quarterback for a series, and give himself an advantage over the defense. And at a certain point, you've got this player on your roster and he's got a uniform on, utilize him if it helps your offense. So I see both sides of that. I don't feel strongly either way. One thing I don't want to see is, we just talked about running backs. You get hurt when you get hit. I don't want to see a rookie come in and take a bunch of abuse as a runner that could potentially get him hurt and hurt his development as a quarterback. So that's one big aspect that I don't want to see, which is why I would much rather see him be a quarterback than be a runner early in his career. But I think his ability to run is part of the reason why you bring him in. He's so big and physical that I don't think he's the type of player that's necessarily going to get hurt easily, but he better not be looking for contact like he did in North Dakota State. If he
I've watched some of that
sliding and getting down, that's for sure.
So, kind of transition over to a kind of a big topic that a lot of 49ers fans are, I can't say worried about, but they're interested in, and that's the Fred Warner contract. I asked Chapman, and I asked him, and he thinks that it's not going to be an issue. He thinks it's going to go along the ways of the Kittle thing. Show up to camp, be there for the team, and you're going to get taken care of. And I kind of agree on that. I don't agree on necessarily holding out. Although, if that's what the agent wants, then that's a different story. What is your expectations? Do you think that they get it done before training camp, or could this drag into this season? What do you think?
It's odd because it sounds like they haven't even started any kind of negotiation, whereas at this point last year they had with Kittle. So I don't know if that means neither side is really worried about it. I'm sure the 49ers aren't in a hurry to give away cash, I'm sure. So maybe that's part of it. If you're Fred Warner, you don't want to get hurt, and that could hurt your long-term value, right? So I'm sure Warner's camp at some point is going to want to ramp this up and get a deal done before the season starts and before preseason game starts and before he starts to put his body on the line during NFL games again. But the 49ers probably aren't in a rush because they know they have a franchise tag out there if they want to use it, and that would be below whatever they were going to pay him for a contract anyway. So there's really no rush for the 49ers to do things unless Fred Warner's camp starts to ramp that up. But if everybody wants to have goodwill, and as Kyle Shanahan said, he wants Fred Warner to be a 49er for life, and Fred Warner sounds like he's not too worried about it and it has been about as pro about this whole thing as you can, and that deal is going to get done at some point. He's going to make a ton of money. Just go hammer it out and get that done before training camp starts. But there's plenty of time to do that. There's still this big 6-week period before camp that they have to figure those things out. I'm sure they want to sign their draft picks first, but I have a feeling there's going to be some very serious phone calls in the month of June at some point with Fred Warner's people in the 49ers. But no, I'm not worried about it at all. I think it will absolutely.
Me neither.
Yeah.
I think with the cap going up next year and Jimmy coming off the books possibly, I just don't see it being necessarily an issue. And from what I've heard, I think the cap's going up in 2023. I don't know if it was you I heard it from, possibly.
Yeah, 2023 is going to go up probably pretty big time. So any big contracts you want to get and pretty much when it comes to NFL players, get your contract. And actually, I see a comment here from Jay in the Bay. He said if the Niners wait and sign Warner, Darius Leonard to the Colts gets signed first, the 49ers will probably pay more than we. Yeah. And that's a great point. Like, sign your top guy first because he's going to want the most money. So if somebody else signs for the most money before Warner does, then he's going to want more money than that. So I think that's smart. And that's what the 49ers should probably be doing, is making sure he's the highest paid linebacker right now and not the highest paid linebacker in 2023 when that number is going to probably shoot up quite a bit.
So, speaking of training camp being a couple weeks off, if you had to look at camp battles or positions of importance that you think that there needs to be, you got to get the best player out of that position by having, whoever the best man is win. Offensive line and wide receiver are definitely my two positions. Corner maybe a distant or very close third. I look at the signing of Mack and Trent Williams as like super important. And I feel like, if you can solidify guard in training camp by, or even, I forget the name of the other guy that they drafted. They said he was a tackle, but
Jalen Moore out of Western Michigan, is it?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like offensive line, wide receiver, corner, those are the three most important battles in camp that I think we're going to need that hopefully, will solidify this team. What are your thoughts? I mean, if you had to have an order of importance.
Yeah, we talked about wide receiver. I think it's wide open 3 through 6, but as far as order of importance, I think that could be any of those guys, any of the 12 players that are vying for those spots. It could be any of them, and I don't think it'll make a huge difference. So it's a great camp battle, but I don't know if it's a huge impact on the 49ers on the field, because I don't know if there's a massive difference between wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 6 or 7. So I would put wide receiver down behind corner. I think for me, corner would be number 1, just because you have a player that didn't really flat out win the starting job on the outside in Emmanuel Mosley. He's a player I like. He's a good player, but he didn't make a bunch of money as a restricted free agent in the offseason. He's not paid like a starting caliber corner, and they drafted 2 cornerbacks to come in and compete. So I think there's an opportunity for one of those young players, even though I wouldn't expect one of those rookies to beat out Emmanuel Moseley. And we know Jason Verrett's injury history too. So that's
yeah.
big one. And K'Wan Williams. So we know K'Wan and Jason Verrett are going to be starters, at least, on the outside, and K1 in the slot, but they have extensive injury histories. So I think depth at cornerback and that competition, and seeing some of the guys that are corner 4, 5, and 6 on the roster really showing out and proving that they can come in and play big time snaps. I think that's really important and really impactful for the 49ers, because we saw when they just plugged in, who was it, Brian Allen last year for a game, and he had a target on his back. Like, you can't do that. That's giving away a football game. If you have a corner on the field that the offense can just go, well, we know we're targeting him and he can't stop us, period. So you can't have that. And I'd be really worried about rookie corners that were drafted in the late 3rd and in the 5th round to be able to come in and really do a great job as rookies, shutting people down. So corner worries me the most. I think it's the most important to see some high level play before the season starts. Guard is important, but they drafted a 2nd round player in Aaron Banks that I'm sure they hope and expect to win that starting right guard spot. I think the rest of the line is perfectly solidified, but it's sort of like wide receiver, where all of the backup spots are wide open. There's going to be a ton of battles there in camp for the rest of the depth chart, but it's not as impactful to me as corner is.
Do you agree that this draft, other than the Trey Lance pick, wasn't the sexiest, but the most kind of like nitty gritty kind of, signing guards and corners and
and running back? It's trading up for running back is something I usually don't like a lot of, and I still was like, what are you doing trading up for him? I would have much rather them draft a higher upside player in the 2nd round, maybe trade up for your guard, see if your running back is still there in the 4th round, or late 3. That's kind of the way I would have looked at things, and maybe they could have got a higher impact draft, a sexier draft out of it. But it's pretty clear what they're trying to do. I think a lot of it has to do with their young quarterback and developing that quarterback and making sure there's not offensive linemen in his lap when he's throwing the ball. Make sure they can move the chains, because their run game with Raheem Mostert and Matt Breida and all those really speedy backs has been yards per carry has been awesome, but it's been a big play running game more so than a move the chains running game. And when you see them adding size on the offensive line, you see them adding a bigger running back like Trey Sermon, who, by the way, had, I think it was the 2nd fastest 10-yard split of all the running backs, even though he only ran a 4.6. They are focused on yards 1 through 4 in the running game more so than they are in hitting the big play, I think, in this draft. And that's what it tells us, is we want to protect our young quarterback. Aaron Banks doesn't get beat as a pass rusher, even though he's not maybe a highlight player, doesn't have a super high ceiling. He's got a high floor, and he does, because he's so big, he doesn't get the pocket pushed back on him a lot. So I think they want to have a clean pocket for their quarterbacks. They want to be able to run the ball and move the chains to help both Jimmy Garoppolo and developing their young quarterback to keep that offense moving and not have big play run and then 3 and out, big play run, 3 and out kind of an offense. I think they want to have a more standard offense that can move the chains a little bit and protect their young quarterback.
Awesome. Quick little question on and then I'll let you go on the linebacker news that I've been seeing. The Niners brought in Brandon Marshall, or they were, I guess they were bringing him in for a visit to look at him. And then there was the James Burgess signing. What do you make of all this? I don't know if it's middle linebacker, or I don't know exactly what position. Would these guys be depth behind the top 2 guys?
I think it's way back into the roster stuff. I think they just have space, and they know they want a certain amount of numbers to have a certain amount of reps in training camp and OTAs with their linebackers. I think it was similar to when they added Marquise Lee and then dropped him and then added Benny Fowler. I think they just want a veteran player, a player that can come in and compete a little bit and can give them some depth in the back end of the roster in case something happens, and have the right amount of numbers they want at each position group to do all the reps they want to do and rep everything out in OTAs and mini camps and in training camp. But I don't think it really affects anything about what the 49ers pecking order is at linebacker. Obviously, we know Fred Warner's the dude at middle linebacker, every down player. Dre Greenlaw, you hope he takes another step. There's been some pretty good Twitter fights about whether he's a good linebacker or not. Probably somewhere in between. I think some fans may overrate him a little bit, but he's not terrible. He's a solid linebacker. And I really like Azeez Al-Shaair and think he has an opportunity
Me
to take
too.
a step. And I think those would be the pretty obvious top three. And then Demetrius Flanagan-Foles has been around for a while and is a nice little depth piece and is a pretty athletic, long sort of linebacker. And maybe some opportunities, who knows, for one of those undrafted free agents to get in there. And then there's Samson Ebukam, who can, float back and forth, can play a little strong side linebacker, do a little Sam with his, in a 2-point stance, can be a defensive end and rush with his hand in the dirt on third down. So that's a fascinating one too, is Samson Ebukam, and see how the 49ers utilize him on defense.
I definitely don't get super excited with a lot of these signings as we get kind of into May and June. I always think a lot of them are more of camp bodies, more or less. I think some people get way too caught up in like, oh, we signed this guy or we signed that guy. And I'm just like, I never get really excited. Like, that's why the Marquise Lee one, as soon as he got released, I'm like, wow, okay, I thought that would happen maybe in camp. They didn't even make a week with him on the team, and then he was gone. So yeah, I don't get super excited this time of year with any, unless it's Julio Jones.
Right. Yeah. Julio Jones would be a big deal. If there's a big trade, obviously you spend all your resources in the draft, and you can see how much money these guys are making to know what the team thinks about them. If you're making just a whatever minimum deal to come in and compete, then you're just a body. But then occasionally there's that Raheem Mostert type of player who you think that about, and then all of a sudden turns into the guy we've seen him be. Or you see some undrafted free agent that shows up, and it turns out that he's a pretty darn good player. So there's those two. So it's never nothing, but it's usually nothing.
That's awesome. I try to fit you in under the time you say you needed, and I think we're going to nail it. Thank you for making time for my slow but maybe budgeting YouTube channel. I am one of your top. I love your podcast. Everybody in here who doesn't know about it, Locked On 49ers. It's pretty much, I'd say, the official 49er podcast. So even during the offseason, you guys can go take a listen to it. And then, of course, during the season, I don't listen to really anybody else during the season when it comes to 49ers and you. So,
oh man, that's awesome. I appreciate that, Aaron. And I thank you for having me on your show. It was fun doing it. It's fun getting the video camera going sometimes, even though I'm in my workout gear, and I'm going to go back and finish some cardio real quick. If my son, who is currently napping, I try to get everything in my life done while my son naps, and I'm worried because he's turning 3 in a month, and the naps are supposed to start ending, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my afternoons when I've got him being a crazy maniac around the house. But yeah, I appreciate you fitting me in. You're a pro at this already. I know you haven't had the channel up for a long time, but I've seen your list of guests, which have been fantastic. So appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the kind words.
Thanks, Brian. You have a good one, man. Take care.
All right. Thanks, man. See you.